Welcome to the lecture on Augustine, and primarily what we are going to be speaking about is trying to introduce you to the various Christian human cultures and the sort of thinking that they produced that we can look at in a course like CVSP, where we're not studying the religious practices in particular, but we're trying to see what these major cultures in 202, the Christian and the Islamic primarily, the Abrahamic monotheistic cultures, what have they produced in terms of philosophy, in terms of art, in terms of whatever it's architecture, whatever it is we can be commenting on during this semester. We start off with the first text that we have is Augustine's Confessions, and we'll be talking more about that very soon. But the background to now Augustine is the Roman Empire in the middle of the 4th century after Christ, with the Emperor Constantine. Up to this point, Christians, like other monotheists, were considered outlaws. They were illegal. They were hounded and persecuted regularly, and then they enjoyed periods of peace in between. But the Roman Empire was primarily not a monotheistic empire, and their religious beliefs, they felt strongly about them, and they thought monotheism was not appreciating their gods, and therefore they, to be a monotheist, a Jew or a Christian, and at that moment in the Roman Empire is quite dangerous. Well, the story goes that the Emperor Constantine was going out to war, and he sees in the sky this, the image you see there that's being painted, a cross with a message saying, "In this sign you will conquer." And he goes into battle and he wins the battle, and for him, he believes that this was a sign for him from the divine. And so he accepts, he legalizes Christianity. But it did not become the actual official religion of the empire until a later emperor named Theodosius actually then made it the official religion of the empire. So, and then it took, of course, many centuries before the whole of Europe became Christian in any serious sense. So when people talk about Christian Europe, they're talking about something that took a long time to forge and form, and then it lasted for a few centuries until we've come into the post-Christian age, which we're living in, of course, for some centuries now. So this is just, this is a picture of Augustine that makes him look very grim, but he was quite an active young man, as we will say. These are some of the people that are connected. We'll be looking at Aquinas. You may have heard of Francis, because all these, these people represent different aspects. Francis now because of the Pope, he took the name of Francis. But these images give you different aspects of of the Christian culture, of the Christian understanding, what it means to be a human being, how to live in society. Very different views were coming up, of course. But Augustine and Aquinas in the West turned out to be the two most influential philosophers, theologians, because they were philosopher-theologians in Western Europe. And Augustine is so important that he was, for 1,000 years, he was considered to be the teacher, al-muallim, of Europe. No one could avoid what Augustine had given for a long period of time in Europe, and his thinking and his output was so serious and significant. Then you're going to be moving into, of course, the world of Islam and the Holy Quran, the Prophet, and the mountain where the revelation came, and the cave, Mecca and the Kaaba, where the Adha, you've seen pictures of this on TV, and the Adha recently, Medina and Munawwara, where the first Islamic community was set up, and when you started to get the Sharia, which we speak about a lot in today's world, for more sort of being applied and coming to be formed and forged, and you'll hear all about this when you come into the Islamic world. Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is going to, they tell us, is going to be a scene of very exciting things in the future, and fortunately I was able to visit it a number of times before our friends, not so friendly Israelis, kept me out after they decided they wanted to take over the whole place. So if you ever have a chance to see and think and read about the Aqsa, that's the Dome of the Rock, of course, but through the Aqsa Mosque are the arches. And the place where the Zionists consider that that was the place of the temple, the ancient temple, Hebrew temple, and they want to rebuild it on the Aqsa, in this area. So it's going to be a hot political situation more and more, unless some miracle happens and we get some kind of common sense in the world and some peace. Islam spread all over northern Europe into Spain and took a lot of very important items into Europe, and Arab philosophy, medicine, legal thinking, astronomy. All of this was a great. This was a great period when Jews, Christians, and Muslims living in this part of the world interacted together in the best possible way, historically speaking, given the fighting they do amongst each other. And they produced a lot of wonderful things that then went into Europe and influenced European thinking and European philosophy and European sciences and astronomy and all that. And with Islam, you'll be introduced to kalam, falsafa, and tasawwuf, so you'll know that Islam isn't just Daesh wa akhawatu, but that it has produced great products in theology, philosophy, and mysticism. These are some of the people that we sometimes look at in 202, but primarily you're going to be looking at Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd, as well as a third person who I don't have a picture of him here, but when you get to there, and then of course at the end of this semester you'll be coming into Dante and the Divine Comedy, and the great sort of synthesis produced in poetry of all of the greatest thinking in art and philosophy and theology and science, put into a great poem, into a great epic poem, the Divine Comedy. He called it the Comedy, then people called it Divine Comedy. They thought it was so great. Okay, then of course in 203, 204, this is our CVSP journey, so you see what the whole program is meant to be, to take you this kind of a journey. So you see how people stand on the shoulders of giants and how they interact with each other, and they move forwards into the modern period with the Renaissance period, really Machiavelli and the Prince, Luther and the Reformation, Shakespeare, scientific revolution with Newton, Kepler, Galileo, people like that, and into the modern philosophy with rationalism and empiricism. These are the names given to them. They're with people like Descartes and Bacon. Bacon be the forerunner of empiricism. Locke and Hobbes, of course, are important because of government. Parliamentary democracy, or do we need a strong central government in order to have any sort of rational peace? They both all now are wanting to think rationally. What's the best way to govern? Is the best rational way to govern? Is it democracy, or is it really a strong central government? Then you go into Kant and the Enlightenment and Goethe and the anti-Enlightenment and the counter-Enlightenment, which Goethe produces with his great figure of Faust. And then Goethe, that's a great work which you read in 203. And the French Revolution, the French Enlightenment, and if you ever want to study it, it's a pretty complex period. It's not as great as sometimes as in cliches people try to make it out to be. There was a lot of oppression, a lot of massacring taking place in the name of reason, in the name of enlightenment. But it was a great moment in history, of course, and it introduced the notion of the citizen and all that. Industrial Revolution, Marx and Mill, Darwin and myself, Nietzsche and Freud and his couch. I'm sure you've heard of some of these people. You'll be looking at that in 204. That's me again. Stephen Hawking and astrophysics, gender studies. Albert Camus, who died young in a car crash. I think it was a conspiracy because I'm Lebanese, because he was a great man. I really admired him. I was sorry to see him die in a car crash. Beckett and The World is Absurd. All this in 204. Our own Edward Said and Orientalism, and everybody has to deal with that work, whether they agree or they disagree. A monumental work in the last period. And people like Najib Mahfouz, Tayyip Saleh, sometimes Elias Khouri of Lebanon, Gibran sometimes is figured into 204. And into the world of globalization, and Che Guevara, Al Pacino is much older now, of course, Bill Gates, Zizou and Shumi and Brad Pitt. Please don't think he really is Achilles or Homer's Achilles. He's a great actor, of course, but read Homer's Iliad. Don't be fooled by the movie Troy. Angelina, Habibti live here, Eminem, and this is Ishtar, Aphrodite, Venus of Lebanon, Ishtar of Lebanon. Everybody looks like her now through plastic surgery. You can all look like her, whether you're male or female. But that's, this is why did I put some of these on there? There's a reason. This is not just sort of light. But and basically, the CVSP, the way we've conceived it all through this, the period it's been living up to today, is that primarily it's an attempt to kind of ask yourself the question, who are my role models? Who do I want to model myself, and why? What are the values? What are the reasons that I think these people are something that I want to admire or that I want to criticize? We embody human values, and so we don't just think of them abstractly. And the term, therefore, existential is extremely important for me in everything we do in this kind of work. And existential does not mean the existentialism of the 20th century, but existential means the kind of experience and knowledge that you get just by being a living, reflecting, wa'i human being. Every minute you're gaining experience, every minute you're gaining data for the kind of knowledge about your own humanity that you can then test with all these theories you read about and all the ideologies and all that sort of stuff. So existential knowledge is extremely important, and it's going to be extremely important for you to understand the Confessions, because the Confessions is first work. Why we choose the Confessions and not some more philosophical work by Augustine or by others? Because this is more characteristic of the kind of human product that comes out of the Christian experience of life, an existential philosophy, a philosophy that is bringing together theory and philosophies and thought and abstraction, but always being tested and experienced and lived and honed and changed and growth in life, in everyday personal life, everyday family life, and everyday socio-historical life. That's the sort of final awareness that we want to try to gain in the humanities at a university, which when universities began, they were all about the humanities. Now it's just, you're forced to take a few courses so that we can really put something behind our desire to see AUB as a place for liberal education. Okay, so let me now come to Augustine proper and tell you why I have had to spend a bit of so much time on this, and but I think it's important for you to understand why. The fly sheet, from my point of view, for us to really get into this kind of a world in any kind of serious way, and not for it to become, very shallow and superficial, which is always the danger when we deal with these great works in such a quick time. But we can, I think, overcome this challenge if we do a sufficient amount of time of putting the text we're reading into proper context. And so in the new 202, which you are now part of, we begin with hoping that you've been introduced through those movie clips to something, there. I don't know what you got from that. But then in the lecture on the philosophical background, so you at least have some introduction if you haven't had to take 201, a quick introduction, but very important, to figures like Plato and Aristotle and Plotinus, Aflatun, who is so important now in this period, the main philosopher, perhaps really of influence in the Hebrew Christian and Islamic philosophical development before Aristotle becomes very, very important. And Aflatun, of course, Plotinus is the philosopher for the Druze, because their religion is a reincarnation, and so only a few people know at this stage what it's really all about. But for the Druze people and the Druze community, when they're guided into philosophy, Aflatun, Plotinus is the major philosopher. So you've been introduced to some of that. What you have not been introduced to, however, and that's my problem, is the Hebrew scriptures. The whole of the Hebrew scriptures, which have formed Augustine's thinking and are on every page of his thinking, as it now has been absorbed, transformed, Christianized in the Christian world. The way the Christian world looked at the Hebrew scriptures and the whole experience, not just the books, you see, it's the whole experience of people from Adam to Christ. The way they understood this is the way a Christian reads, of course, the old, what they call the Old Testament. The Hebrews call it their Bible, the Hebrew scriptures. But without some time spent on that, I find it's a very shallow way of entering into studying any Christian philosopher of this particular time. Augustine So therefore, the fly sheet, if you take a look at it, it's kind of a working paper for your sometimes I get, some teachers tell me that the students actually enjoy it because they have something to read. They do read it and they get something from it. And then it's up to each of the teachers. Some of them make use of them, some of them don't. But my apology for it is I personally cannot give a lecture on Augustine without telling you that to really read this person, as to read anything you're going to do, you have to really read the kind of all the major influences on that person. So on the very first page, this is an attempt. I'm not going to have any time to go into it in detail, unfortunately, but the title there is, under the subtitle, Thinkers in Monotheistic Societies, is what we are going to be looking at in 202. We're not doing religion. It's not a study in philosophy of religion or anything like that. It's more a humanities program, introducing you to how human beings and other cultures have thought about their human life. And the human life is thought of usually and globally in terms of four major categories: the divine, the universe. The cosmos is the Greek word for the universe. The divine, is there a divine? Is the cosmos the divine? Is the divine simply part of nature? Is the divine separate from nature and the creator of nature, the way monotheists think? So these are the categories that one thinks of in these humanities courses and approaches, is how did this culture understand finally mainly the main items of how they understood the divine? Okay, for monotheism, of course, for Abrahamic monotheism, God, one God. All right, the cosmos, the universe, well, that's just simply the creation of this one God. But then there are many other things under that. The second main category is the human being. How is this culture taught an Augustine to think about his own humanity and the human race generally? All right, these are some items there about how how this person thinks about the human, because each one of us thinks when we say the human, we have our own views. Society, humans together. Right, the socioeconomic political situation, what kind of government, what kind of interaction, and what is society? Is it just sort of a necessary creation because we have to survive? Or as we see in monotheism, it's more like it's a family in one sense, brothers and sisters. Brothers was always used generically, but now you have to say brothers and sisters. All right, knowledge. Okay, what is knowledge? Okay, all cultures in one way or another do some sort of scientific and systematic work on life so that they can go beyond it, and kind of what we would call the kind of theoretical knowledge, scientific knowledge, abstract philosophical knowledge. But there's another kind of knowledge that is at the heart of the Hebrew Scriptures. You cannot read the Hebrew Scriptures if you don't understand it. And in fact, it became very popular only in the late 19th and into the 20th century in philosophy itself, which is existential philosophizing. Not a school of thought, existentialism, those are isms, but a way of approaching knowledge that takes into account the everyday, real relationship knowledge you get by being in relationship, by having to relate to yourself, by having to relate to people around you, by having to relate to a God, or if you believe in that the kind of knowledge you're picking up all the time gives you a laboratory of data, which is called existential knowledge, which you then reflect upon, and you use all of your scientific and abstract and theoretical knowledge upon to try to make more sense out of it and make it real and apply it. This is at the heart of the Hebrew Scriptures. There's nothing very theoretical there. There's nothing very abstract there. It's all about life, and that's why it's difficult to understand and read, and therefore it puts everything into it. It doesn't try to just give you some philosophy out of it. And primarily it tells you about how horrible humans are and how horrible the Jews were, and and you have to get a philosophy out of it. You have to see, well, what were they talking about? What was the experience they were living? What were they understanding about the divine? What were they understanding about the universe? What were they understanding about the human being? What was their understanding about society? And what was in this way, through this awareness that knowledge comes in an existential, personal, relationship, social way, and not just in an abstract way. And of course, virtue and vice, excellence and mediocrity in the Greek world, if you took 201, virtue, what is excellence, okay, and vice is mediocrity in the Greek world. Primarily, those were, once you understood that world well in terms of not just philosophy, but its epics, its tragedy, and all of this. The mainly excellence, a search for excellence, was the Greek ideal, and the opposite of it is to not seek excellence, to just put up with mediocrity and just want to get along in life and not have anything that you're ready to live and die for. Much of the literature in 201 expresses that reality. And therefore, what is evil, and finally, what is love, since love has so many different meanings and words. These are the kind of categories that you would have to understand more deeply how Augustine thought about them, bringing together his Greek, or his what I call the Homeric Greek philosophical, Greek or Roman philosophical background, as well as his now Abrahamic Hebrew monotheistic background, bringing them together to get into the mindset of Augustine, to then be able to read his Confessions, which is a very personal work, telling you about his life, all right? But because he's such a brilliant person, because he has so much background philosophically and literarily and everything, the book becomes a very famous work throughout, and a very influential work. People used to carry this around. I'm surprised at the types of people throughout history who would carry Augustine's Confessions around with them. Some of them would surprise you. But that's what this work is about. This is what this work now is about, how this gentleman in the mid-4th century, when the Roman Empire had legalized Christianity, but Christianity was not yet the official religion of the empire. They had to struggle to survive. There was a lot of struggle going on, a lot of different groups and sects wanting to be to be in power, because religion is always, one aspect of religion is always the aspect of power, and so it attracts people to want to make use of it to kind of come into power. He was in a very turbulent period, not just intellectually, but also politically and socially. So, since I don't have time to go through those things, I have some details on that sheet, and if if your teacher wishes to go through them, I would like to do that in a separate lecture, as we used to do in the past. But now students say they don't like lectures, so we have reduced them. If you look at the second page of the fly sheet, just to tell you what they are, so that if you wish to use them, you may. The second is to just introduce you to, when you talk about faith, or when you talk about theology, or when you talk about religion or philosophy of religion, just to give you an idea that there's no one thing here. Faith can mean uninformed belief, just the simple belief of people living in a monotheistic community and sort of living it out in whatever way, without reflecting on it. Legalism, when monotheism becomes simply a legalistic system of a law and loses any sort of other more human, more spiritual, more social meaning, and it just becomes just a law. The way it happened for the Pharisees by the time of Christ, and this was Christ's main attack against the Pharisees, is they had reduced the richness and the humanity and the spirituality of monotheism into just their law, their version of a Sharia. So that's legalism. It can be also a vibrant way of life and experience, and that's how Augustine is experiencing it, and that's what has kept monotheism alive in all of its forms. So there are people in all of the monotheistic communities who are living it out as a way of life and way of experience, and they're finding it enriching, and they're adding to it, and they're living it, and they're trying to make use of it to help mankind. So there's a big spectrum. These are just some things. There's a spectrum from the rigid and the fanatical to the more enlightenment and the more dynamic when you talk about faith. So when you talk about faith in Augustine, he's come to this through a personal. If you look at it says context a little bit below on that sheet. The context, the journey of a soul. This is a man who was seeking truth all of his life, but very realistically, he recognized you had to pay a price to follow the truth. And this leads him, by the way, to a very important philosophical conclusion, which influences many philosophers after him. And that the Greek view basically had followed Socrates, with some nuances, of course, but that if ignorance is the problem. And once you educate people, once they get more knowledge, more reason, if you know what's right, you will do what is right. Augustine, in his pursuit of truth and his desire to do the right, comes to recognize something existential, something human, something real in his own humanity. There's something within him that fights the truth when it's not to his self-interest. And this brings him into exploring the whole notion of our human will, not just human reason, as he had gotten from the Greeks and the Romans and learned much from them, standing on their shoulders, of Plato particularly and Plotinus, but something they did not explore, the whole thing that we call our will. They had never gone into it in the same depth that they'd gone into the exploration of the fight between reason and the passions, between reason and the emotions, between rationality and the body. But nobody in philosophy had focused on really understanding or paying attention to the facts of life when your will goes against your reason. And so this becomes a major philosophical insight of Augustine's philosophy. But in his journey, he tried all the great philosophies of the day. Manichaeism is kind of a heretical Christian sect. They claimed to be the true Christianity, following Mani, who claimed he was the Holy Spirit of God. And so people followed him and the Manichaeans, and they taught that there were two major forces. So in a sense, this is dualism. It's not monotheism. It's deism. But they were so powerful that they attracted him for 8 years to be part of their system. And some historians say if it wasn't for Augustine, Western Christianity would have become Manichaeism. However, because of his scientific, philosophical mind, when he finally meets some of their greatest people, there are two problems he had. He always had a problem with sex. He was unlike you all. You all have sex under control, no problem. All right. He was, as a young man, he found sex to be quite a challenge, and this kept him. So he found that his desire for sex kept him from accepting the truth at various times. So with Manichaeism, he found himself not able to accept their belief that sex was basically evil. Marriage was evil. The great elite of the Manichaeans would not get married because sex was somehow evil. And so he never sort of got into the elite, the highest levels of the Manichaean structure, and this kept him from it. But then when finally, as he will recount in the Confessions, when he meets their supposedly very important people, he finds them very unscientific. He finds that they do not correspond to what he thought he was going to find in some kind of deep, rational thought. So he leaves them. He tries astrology, and if you read the pages he says about astrology, I think you'll find them interesting, especially those of you who are addicted to astrology. He tries that for a while, but then he rejects it again on a very sort of rational, scientific basis. If you wish to read it, you don't have to agree with anything anybody says, but read and understand. That's the point. Try to understand what this person is saying before you then are in a good position to reject them with your own views. He tried skepticism, the notion that how can you know anything with certainty? All right? How do you know that you're really sitting here? It's not something else. How do you know that you were you yesterday? How do you know that anything exists with certainty? Nothing is certain. So he comes up with the famous, even if I am deceived, I am. Some of you have had Descartes in high school, or I think, therefore I am, or I think I am. Well, 1,300 years before Descartes, the rational mind came to this conclusion. Al-Ghazali comes to something similar in the Islamic world when he's using his mind. All right, that it seems to be something that tempts the rational thinker. That there are certainties. They may not be as many as people would like to think they are, but there are some things you cannot doubt. And you can't doubt your own existence, because even if you're being deceived, you can't be being deceived if you're not existing. But then he comes to two others, and that's what I find him very interesting and very profound. He says, but immediately there are two other certainties that come into my consciousness. Knowledge. There is knowledge, because here is one thing I know, and that is that I exist. So self-existence is certain, knowledge is existence, and then as I'm observing my own self to get my conclusions about philosophy and life and truth, all right, I notice that I don't just sort of accept them like a computer or something, but that I'm happy about it, I desire it, I accept it, or I reject it. So there are three things in me that are certain, and he calls them existence, knowledge, and love. All right, the memory, understanding, and will. And I'll talk about these three aspects. These three aspects, for him, they become the philosophical basis of his philosophy of the human being. His anthropology, his philosophical anthropology, is based on that you start with something certain, and the certain things are my existence, knowledge, and my will. So for him, will is love. So for him, love is the amor of Plato. All right, is not the eros of Plato, which becomes amor in the Latin. All right, Plato's eros is primarily an understanding of the will. So the will loves and accepts and rejects. loves and hates, but that it has a force of its own. It doesn't simply follow reason. And that it's the spoiler, if you like. It's what keeps us back from really just simply following what our own reason tells us is true and that we should follow. So, skepticism, he then leaves them. He tries each of these. He spends time with them. He doesn't just read books about them. And that's how you get to know a community, and you get to know, something important that you're interested in. You have to get to know the people who are living them. And if there's nobody living them, that's the problem of monotheism, by the way. If you read the Hebrew Scriptures, the problem of monotheism in the Hebrew Scriptures is God, supposedly through the prophet, is constantly saying, you are giving God a bad name because you are supposed to, the monotheistic peoples are supposed to be living in such a way that's so attractive. Other peoples will say, well, their God must be the true God, since it was polytheistic cultures and every culture had its own God. Well, there were no proofs for the existence of God or something like that, but rather the people monotheists are supposed to be a witness, a shahada. That's the whole point of monotheism. And a shahada can only be understood if you bring together abstract philosophizing with this existential philosophizing, which Augustine exemplifies in this particular work. So the philosophers that he really starts to like are the Platonists, because he feels they have taught him to go beyond the materialism of the other philosophies of the day. The Manichaeans, the Stoics, the Epicureans, the other popular philosophies in the Roman Empire were all materialists. There's no spiritual reality separate from the material. So he found Plato's philosophy through Plotinus, helping him to now understand how you can, as a rational human being, can understand the possible existence of a spiritual reality and not just a material reality. So he spends a lot of time with the Platonists, whom he always admires and credits. But then, all this time, he has been looking at monotheism in his Christian version, reading the Bible. It seemed second-rate compared to the great works of philosophy and literature that he was dealing with in the Greco-Roman world, until he meets some Christians who are able to then help him understand. And he mentions some of them there. Help him to see how you have to read this work. You don't read the Bible the way you read a book of philosophy. You don't read the Bible the way you read, some other thing. To see how you read that, to understand it. Anyway, he was now able to start to understand Christianity. Little by little, he started to appreciate it, to get into it, to then want to accept it. And then, as he will tell you in books 7 and 8 of this here, that's where he starts to find the internal struggle. My mind tells me I should accept this. I should come into your covenant. I should come into the covenant with the monotheistic God, right? But, and he says, I didn't have to go very far to do this. All it took was an act of will. And I couldn't get my will to do it because I didn't want to leave, the life he was living. When you find something really worthwhile, there's usually a price you have to pay. And so he found, the price. He just didn't want to pay it, and so his will was struggling against it until finally the will accepts. And he, as he says and he then accepts the covenant, and this leads him into the whole monotheistic world of joy and peace and communion and all the stuff that that Christians talk about. And he goes into he becomes a part of a community. Didn't want to ever become a priest or a bishop. He kept running away from places because they want to get him. The institution always wants to get people who are really doing a good job and get them into the institution. He wanted to stay out of the institution. He wanted to just go on, being creative and living and growing as a philosopher and his spirituality. But they finally caught up to him, and they made him not just a priest, but they made him a bishop. And a bishop meant, somebody very important in those days, a leader of a community, and big headaches. He had to take care of all kinds of people. Now, for him, from his own thing, this is where existential knowledge comes in for him. He says, as he had to deal with people all the time, suddenly his view of humanity, his view of life, his view of truth started to get human, start to get personal, start to have the existential aspect of truth enter into, the great mind that he had. And this helped him to come to the conclusions that he comes to finally about how to do this. I put all this into the element that's up there on when he comes into into Christianity as a bishop in North Africa, by the way, in Hippo. It's a different name now, of course. But then starts a time of tremendous literary output. The Confessions, which you're reading, and The City of God, which is the first attempt to write a philosophy of human history, not just Roman history or Greek history or Persian history, but of human history, the history of mankind. The City of God becomes a first in a whole series, like his autobiography becomes the first true autobiography, or the man is speaking truly about his life, concretely, about how it went, not whitewashing it or trying to make himself like some kind of hero or something like that, but something that people reading it and know him would say, yes, we see this in this man. An honest, transparent account of his own life as he now understands it after 11 years of living in the Christian faith. 11 years later, he writes the Confessions. He writes The City of God as the first attempt to write a philosophy of human history, trying to see what is it that really moves human history finally. And for him, it always comes back to love. But love has so many different meanings. That's one of the things, if I had more time, I'd like to go into this to help you see that. Because today you hear the word love and it just means whatever that person happens to do it. But for him, it always comes back to some form of relationship. History moves in terms of how humans relate to one another. That's finally. Everything else is important, the economic factor, all the other factors. We say today the genome, the whatever as well, all of our genetic factors. All of this is very, very important. He doesn't neglect that whole aspect of knowledge, but he focuses on finally, it's the human beings who are making human history. And what is it that really finally, philosophically, at the deepest level, existentially from your experience, what is it that's moving you and moving people? It's our love, okay? And so for him, either our love is balanced, where we love our neighbor the same way we love ourselves, because if we don't love ourselves, we don't know how to love our neighbor. If we have never been loved, we don't know how to love. All right, this is his whole understanding of love, that basically you need to be loved, first of all. If you're never loved with a serious kind of love, then you'll never know how to give that love. And if you only love yourself, you'll never know how to go out of yourself to love others the same way you love yourself, but also to love God first, since this is monotheism. So your love needs to be a balanced love, and that's your will. Your will is there. You see, your will decides what to love. And your reason gives you the reasons and the standards and the rules and the light and the vision, but it doesn't give you the power. The power comes from, the dynamo comes from your will. And so in discovering this in his own humanity, in observing it in the humanity of the people around him, he then comes to his own conclusion that this must be what's really driving history forwards, the whole of human history. As the will expresses itself through humans. Very interesting, for him, government was simply a pirate band that's taken over the nation. Now, we in Lebanon would never believe that. Okay? But that is something he believed. He believed that government is primarily a pirate band that has taken over. He really hated institutions, but he was forced to come into the institution and of the Christian institution, and then he became he had to sort of make his way through, and there was no option in those days of a secular university. Everybody was fighting everybody, unlike today when we all get along together because we're so reasonable. And so he had to take certain stands against certain things that were happening in his society that appeared to be destructive, or groups that were trying to take over power and that he thought weren't there. So this man became very, very much caught up with not just the intellectual world, but the pastoral world, as we say in monotheism. Pastoring is when leaders in the monotheistic communities have to take care of other human beings. All right, they learn a lot more about other humans, they learn a lot more about themselves, etc. So this is the man we're looking at. But the second thing there, elements of an existential, phenomenological approach. This is just to let you know that there is this approach in philosophy, because it's not often mentioned, unfortunately. We only talk about the abstract things in philosophy usually. But there was a very powerful movement in the 20th century in philosophy from some of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century who used this particular methodology. And they saw in Augustine a predecessor. All right? They didn't accept his Christianity. Many of them were atheists or agnostics, but they saw the methodology that he had been employing in the Confessions and elsewhere was very much useful to sort of understand. And so I've described it there, and you can do it for your own reading if you wish. Names at the bottom of that page: Manichaeans, sex and marriage, sources of evil, no free will, so he finally rejects them. The Donatists, they are the ones who say, we are the only true monotheists, we are the only true Christians, everybody else is not a true Christian, and so we can go and persecute them and do whatever we like. You know, he was very much more for the universality of monotheism, the universalism of Christianity, that it included the saints and the sinners, that it was not just for those people who considered themselves perfect, because in fact nobody is perfect, and if anybody thinks they're perfect, they're the worst sinners. But the Donatists represent that kind of movement throughout monotheistic history, where certain groups think they are pure, they are the best, they're the only ones, and they think that this gives them a divine right to persecute everybody else. He thought that within the church there are devils, and within the world there are saints, so that for him it's this love. The proper love flows through history and through communities, and therefore it's not just people who are in the physical church that are saved, but people who are following and accepting and whatever God is revealing to them with the proper love and the proper will. So he says there are saints outside of the church, and there are devils within the church. On the other pages there, on the next page there, again, there are other stuff there that, you know, these are simplistically presented, but they are topics. A main topic on that third page there is the relationship between faith and philosophy, if you like. And his whole philosophy has been called faith seeking understanding. The experience of life, seeking to put it into a philosophical formula or expression. Faith seeking understanding. So the life of faith, the experience of faith, all the knowledge and all the stuff that comes through the life of faith, now seeking to put it into a communicable form so it can dialogue and debate with other philosophers and that. So faith seeking understanding. And basically, again, the things are there. Basically, the main items there that he thinks is that faith is not opposite to understanding. Believing doesn't mean something irrational to understanding. That on the contrary, the life of faith is the data without which you will never understand monotheism. You'll never, philosophically, if you just have theories about it, if you don't have the experience of faith, you just have dogmas and doctrines, you will never understand it. So for him, faith is necessary if you want a true understanding of monotheism. If you want to have a true understanding of the Christian faith in his particular sense, you have to then get yourself wet, your feet wet in the ocean of life, and then come back and reflect upon that experience. So faith gives you the material of the data, then the reason comes and looks at it and sees some things as irrational, some things as wrong, some things as right. It organizes it, fixes it, etc. So this dynamic interaction between the life of faith and reason is his particular contribution to theology and Christian theology, of course. The last page, and with the references on the back, are in fact one lecture. And that would be very nice to do that, but I didn't want to, I could have just done that today and satisfied, I have 3 more minutes, I'm not comfortable doing that. Somebody else can do that if they wish, but I've mentioned what it is. That basically, the aspect that you can sort of put you can focus on in the readings is, first of all, see if you can become aware of the new approach that he is using, which philosophers later on called inward empiricism in the 20th century. Meaning, philosophy now seeks fact. Empiricism means you're looking for facts, observable facts. It's an inward empiricism. You look at everything outside of you, you study everything, but you need to also look and see how you are interacting with the outside world. And as you look and see how you are interacting with the outside world, you discover yourself. And so the self has to be understood. The life world, the Lebenswelt in the German in the 20th century. You'll discover the life world of the human self so that you can see whether you're relating accurately and properly when you're making your conclusions about everything else outside. So the self for him was a unity, a trinity. And this is the meaning of Trinity. Trinity does not mean three gods. Trinity does not mean a triad of three presidents in Lebanon. All right? A trinity means there's one God, of course, in monotheism, beyond reasoning, beyond formulation, philosophically, but experienced by the human being for these people as Trinity, as God the Father, God the Creator, God the Sustainer, and then through Jesus, God with man. So in the life of Jesus, they supposedly experience another aspect of the same divine, and then through the Holy Spirit of God who comes into them and that forms the first Christian community and starts to give them power to live a new life. All right? These three human experiences of the one divine come to be formulated I don't know how many years after Christ, in the philosophical, theological notion of Trinity. So Trinity is not something. It's not in the Bible, right? That the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit are in the Bible. The three, how to put them together and how to understand them is, of course, not something very, very simple. In the Christian world, it's simply a witness, a faith that I'm experiencing God as Father, I'm experiencing God as Jesus, I'm experiencing God as the Holy Spirit. And what this means philosophically, I can never put it into words, because this God is beyond definition. But that's what the Christian Trinity is all about. Well, he sees the reflection of the Trinity in the human being. So when he comes to what I told you before, I exist, I know, I love, the three modes of my humanity, which I discover immediately and then learn to explore and understand better. I am, I know, I love. This is me. I'm a Trinity. The Son is a Trinity. A Trinity is not something, just a word applied to the divine. It can be applied to many things. Of course, for the Christian, it has a very special meaning for the divine, meaning you can never understand it rationally, but that God himself has actually revealed himself in these three ways, and so you accept it insofar as it makes sense to you and insofar as you're living it. So for him, the human being is a Trinity. I am, I know, I love. So the I am, the existence, is the main thing for him. Memory, the understanding I've spoken a little bit about before on that second page, and I've spoken a little bit about that, the love. This is difficult to do in just a few minutes. I would have liked to have had much more time for this, but he finally thinks that my human consciousness, he calls memory. I am three-dimensional. Immediately I discover I don't just think in one dimension. My mind is operating in three dimensions at one moment. There's no present. The present is quickly becoming past and future. And so this is my human consciousness. So memory doesn't just mean what I can remember. It means me as an exister. That's what existence means. It means I am a three-dimensional creature, therefore my past is alive in my present. The future is affecting me right now. The fact that you want grades is why you're not all just sort of throwing basal at me or whatever. You want to watch out for the future. We live in the future. In fact, monotheism is futuristic more than anything else. We live in the future, but it doesn't mean as an escapism from the present. It just means the future is influencing me right now. And for the monotheist, of course, they claim it should be influencing me positively. I should be, because of the future impact on me, I should be doing my best to bring heaven on earth, as the Christians pray every day in the Lord's Prayer, make this earth heavenly. Or I should be taking this seriously. So whatever I get from my future hope that there's much more for me than just here. But right now I have work to do, and the work is to bring heavenliness into this world, the proper love. The balanced love, as opposed to just the selfish love who loves yourself only at the expense of everything else. So that's your memory, and that's it's as the totality of your consciousness. When you do pray supposedly as a Christian, you're not praying to yourself. So God is not in you in that sense, but it's as memory is the way you relate. That's prayer is you as the fullness of your existence relating to God, who is your creator, who's transcendent, who's above you, etc. And he expresses that in various ways. Myself as understanding is the interaction of experience and reason, on that second page. And myself as will is the main core of my humanity, and his main contribution perhaps to philosophy generally is that you have to take seriously the independent and autonomous power of the human will, and it does not just follow reason automatically. Thank you for your patience. For whatever it's worth, I try to introduce you to this whole world. It's up to your students, your teachers, to do whatever they wish to do with you with this material. This PowerPoint is on there if you wish to. It's on the web. If you wish to go through it, it may have some things there that you actually read that might interest you. Not the one I showed you at the beginning. The one I would have had. I had 2 lectures I would use, but I did it rather in this way to try to get through things. But all this is will be on the web. Not the first things I was showing you, but this one, if you wish to look at it.